Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tipped. My name is Julian, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Pittsburgh Penguins, continuing that series of episodes that we've been making, talking about each team, talking about my projected lines for them, and then talking about their individual noteworthy players, and if I think that you could consider drafting them in your upcoming fantasy draft. Before we get started, guys, please leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. More than half of you guys that watch this channel are not subscribed, so it really would mean the world to me if you hit that subscription button. Now, the Pittsburgh Penguins had a offseason that could have been really detrimental. They could have lost a lot of important players this offseason, but they managed to re-sign everybody: Letang, Malkin, Rickard Rakell, and they've got pretty much the same team as they did last year, and they got another chance to compete for the Stanley Cup once again this year. Do I think they're going to win the Cup? No, but I think they're going to have a competitive team. So without further ado, let's jump into the content, and let's jump into the lines that I project for the Penguins this year. On the top line, Jake Guentzel, Sidney Crosby, and Bryan Rust. On the second line, Jason Zucker, Evgeni Malkin, and Rickard Rakell. On the third line, Brock McGinn, Jeff Carter, and Kasperi Kapanen. Let's jump right into their noteworthy players now. And the player going the earliest in drafts is Sidney Crosby with an ADP of 18.9. And last year, Crosby had himself a really nice season with 84 points in 69 games. Also shot the puck a decent amount. And if he stays healthy this year, he's going to have himself a really nice season once again. The thing is, he's going at ADP of 18.9. I currently have him ranked in the 40s in terms of best fantasy players this year, mostly because he is a natural center. And there are so many natural centers this year that it just makes the position as a whole really not that valuable, and that's why I have him dropped a few spots. Not to mention, he finished as the 24th best fantasy player in terms of fantasy points per game last year, so drafting him around 18-19 is just a little bit early. Next is Jake Guentzel, who scored 84 points in 76 games. Another solid season for Jake Guentzel. His shooting percentage was only 15%, and he's historically shot even higher than that, so his goals can go even higher and should be playing on a very strong line with Crosby and Rust. Definitely like Jake Guentzel this year for fantasy hockey. I actually have him ranked as my 20th best fantasy player this year. And then I have Kris Letang, who scored 68 points in 78 games last year with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and his shooting percentage was actually a little bit low. He's also going to continue to man that top power play in Pittsburgh with Crosby, with Guentzel, with Malkin. It's going to be another very good season for Kris Letang. I have him ranked as the 31st best fantasy player this year, and his ADP is currently 59.7. He's an absolute steal. And I think he's one of the best value picks early in the draft. And then I have Evgeni Malkin, and I think he's going to have himself a really strong season this year if he can stay healthy. While he was healthy last year, he scored 42 points in 41 games, and he was pretty good. Obviously, he was a minus player, which wasn't the most ideal thing, but he shot the puck 3 times per game, which is really good, and I think he's going to have himself a nice year this year. The thing that's holding him back is that he is a natural center, so while I do see him finishing inside the top 60 players this year, because he's a natural center, he's a little bit less valuable, which is why I don't absolutely love drafting him at this ADP. But if you do draft him here, definitely not the worst thing in the world, especially if you're in a league that has a whole bunch of forward spots instead of forward positions like left wing, center, and right wing, just forwards, or if you have a utility spot. Drafting Malkin here isn't necessarily the worst draft pick in the world, that's for sure. Next, I have Tristan Jarry, who I absolutely loved at his ADP last year, and he had himself a really strong season. And now this year, he's going at an ADP of 64.4. I have him ranked as the 11th best fantasy goalie, so going as an AP as 64.4 is definitely a tad early. There are goalies that I like a little bit better than Jarry who are going a little bit later, so those guys are a little bit better value than Jarry. However, if you do draft Jarry here, he is bound to have a really strong year, so I don't absolutely hate the pick. But guys like Demko, Hellbuck, and even Jack Campbell are much better value picks for goalies than Tristan Jarry at this current ADP. And then I have Bryan Rust, who had 58 points in 60 games last year, finished as the 56th best fantasy player last year. He's currently going at ADP of 96.1. That's super late for Bryan Rust. Probably is going to play on that top line with Guentzel and Crosby, and he's someone that's super underrated every single year, and that's why he always goes later in drafts, and he's going to be an absolute steal where he's currently going, especially as a right winger, which is a position that's a little bit harder to draft players for this year. Definitely like Bryan Rust at his current ADP. And then I have Jeff Petry, who only had 27 points in 68 games last year with the Montreal Canadiens. Yeah, he had a rough season last year. But prior to that, when he was the number 2 D-man on the team behind Shea Weber in Montreal, they were able to coexist, and Petry managed to put up some solid offensive numbers for multiple seasons straight. Now, last year he finished as the 223rd fantasy defenseman in terms of fantasy points per game, which isn't particularly great, but he only shot the puck 1.8 times per game last year, which should go up a little bit. But he also had some solid hits and block peripherals, which he should be able to maintain this year. So in conclusion, I didn't include him in my top 50 defenseman video, which you could check out up top if you do want to check that out. But he's definitely someone who could be a honorable mention in that video because I do still see him putting up some decent offensive numbers, nothing too crazy like 30, 35 points, with some decent peripherals. So he's someone that should be drafted in your league, but at this ADP, it's a little bit high, so I'm not super crazy about him here. Next, I have Rickard Rakell, who had 41 points in 70 games last year, ended up as the 138th best player in terms of fantasy points per game, and is currently going an ADP of almost 170, which is pretty late, and this year he gets Evgeni Malkin on his line for most of the season instead of just half the year. I really like Rakell this year, especially since he's got that dual eligibility with both left wing and right wing eligibility. Rakell is a good draft pick this year at that ADP. And then I have Jeff Carter, who had himself honestly a pretty nice year last year with 45 points in 76 games, 200 shots on goal, and he finished as the 172 best player in terms of fantasy points per game, which is good. I don't like him this year though because a lot of his upside last year came from when Malkin was injured and he was manning the second line center spot. Now, with a full healthy team, Malkin is going to be manning that second line, and Jeff Carter is going to be relegated to a third line center role, and I just don't see the upside there. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. Please leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. And if you do want to take your support to the next level, the link to my Patreon is down in the description. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.